Trey held up $100 bill right in my face, grill smoke curling between us. $100 says you can't ask Elise to dinner. You don't have the guts. I looked at the money. Then I looked across the yard, past the string lights, past the red cups on the checkered tablecloth, past 20 people laughing in the golden haze of a July evening. Elise was standing by the food table, holding a cup of water, and for 1 second, her eyes found mine. Then she looked away. I took the money, but I didn't know that bet was never Trey's. My name is Marcus Cole. I was 36 years old that summer, and I worked as a mechanical engineer at the Henderson shipyard on the east side of Savannah, Georgia. I had been there 11 years. Starting the week after I graduated from Georgia Southern, I knew the smell of diesel fuel and welding flux better than I knew what was in my own refrigerator on any given Tuesday. I could recite torque specifications from memory, but I could not tell you the last time I had made plans with another human being on a Friday night. That was who I was, a man who was good with machines and quiet with people. I lived alone in a one-story house on Habersham Street, white siding, green shutters, small yard in front, big yard in the back. The backyard was the whole reason I bought the place. I built a grill out of an old steel drum I salvaged from the shipyard, welded a hinged lid onto it, and bolted it to a brick platform I laid myself over a weekend. I drove a Ford pickup with 200,000 miles on it. The paint was fading. The driver's side mirror had a crack running down the middle, but the engine ran clean because I tuned it every 3 months. That was what I did. I kept things running. Danielle signed the divorce papers 2 years before that barbecue. We had no children together. She told me near the end that I lacked ambition. What she meant was I would rather read an engine manual on a Friday night than go to a cocktail party. I would rather rebuild a carburetor than book a cruise. She wanted a man who knew how to perform, someone who looked as good at a fundraiser as he did at the breakfast table. I only knew how to work. When she left, she called our house a shoebox with a backyard. She was not wrong. But the shoebox was quiet after she moved out, and somewhere in those first months of silence, I stopped missing the noise. I learned to like the quiet. I learned to mistake it for peace. Trey Landry was my best friend. We met in 10th grade when his family moved to Savannah from Baton Rouge, and by junior year, he was the kind of friend who showed up uninvited with donuts and a bad idea and somehow made both feel like gifts. Trey was loud, funny, always had a dare or a bet. He also had a younger sister named Elise, 3 years younger. Quiet where Trey was loud. Back when Elise lived in Savannah, I knew her only from family gatherings at the Landry house. She would sit in the corner of the porch with a paperback, barely speaking. 3 years ago, she moved to Portland to work as a pastry chef. Around that time, I got married, then divorced. Now Elise was back, had been home 2 weeks. The barbecue was Trey's idea. He said it was to welcome Elise home. But Trey never needed a noble reason to throw a party. We held it in my backyard because his apartment had a balcony the size of a bathtub. I grilled the meat, he mixed drinks. About 20 people showed up. The sun was sinking. Country music drifted from a Bluetooth speaker on the porch railing, and down the street a neighbor's dog barked at nothing. Then Trey pulled me aside and held up that bill. I was not good at dating. After the divorce, I did not ask anyone to dinner, did not download apps, did not go to bars. I got comfortable with silence, with eating alone, with coming home to a house that smelled like nothing because no one else had been in it. But that bill was in my hand, and Trey was grinning like he had already won. "You know what your problem is, Marcus?" he said. "You're more afraid of being happy than you are of being alone." And before I could answer, I noticed something. Elise had brought a white pastry box tied with string and placed it on my table, not Trey's table, not the drinks table, mine. She did not say a word about it, did not look at anyone when she set it down. And I thought, why would she bring something to my house instead of her brother's? I held the money. I looked across the yard at Elise, and I walked. I did not know what to say. I never did. I crossed the yard, stepped around 2 guys arguing about the Falcons, and stopped beside Elise at the food table. I pointed at the white pastry box. "Did you bring that?" She nodded. "Pecan pie," she said. "Trey told me you like pecan." I was surprised Trey remembered. I was surprised anyone remembered anything about what I liked. For a second, I did not know what to do with the fact that someone had thought about me enough to ask. Then I said it plain. No charm, no rehearsed line. "Would you want to grab dinner sometime next week?" Elise looked at me. Not a glance, a real look. The kind that holds you in place. Her eyes were brown and steady. Then she said one word, "Okay." No smile, no polite deflection, just, "Okay." I walked back to Trey and tried to hand him the $100. He pushed my hand away. "Keep it, man. You earned it." I folded the bill and slipped it into my shirt pocket. Here is the thing I did not learn until months later. Elise told me sitting on my back porch one autumn evening that the bet was her idea. She called Trey 2 days before the barbecue and said, "Is there any way you can get Marcus to talk to me?" Trey came up with the theatrics, the dare. The $100 waved in my face. But the money was Elise's. She gave it to Trey before the party and told him to make it look like his idea. The pecan pie she called Trey and asked what dessert I liked, then woke at 5 in the morning to bake it from scratch. Everything from the beginning was Elise's design. She knew I would never cross that yard on my own. A man who has been told he is not enough does not volunteer to hear it again. So she built me a bridge and disguised it as a dare. I was the last one to figure it out. I picked Elise up for dinner the following Saturday in my old truck. I apologized for the scratches on the door, the dust on the dashboard, the crack in the passenger mirror. She climbed in, ran her hand across the cracked vinyl seat and said, "I like trucks with scratches. It means someone actually uses them." That one sentence loosened a knot I did not know I had been carrying. We went to a small seafood place on the river, wooden tables, ceiling fans turning slow overhead, a screen door that creaked every time someone walked in. Neither of us was a talker, but the silence between us was not the nervous kind. It was the kind that tells you you have been holding your breath around other people for years, and here, finally, you can exhale. We talked about work. I told her about the shipyard, the hull repairs, the noise that rang in your ears for hours after a shift, the way a finished boat looked sliding into the water for the first time, like something heavy learning how to float. She told me about her bakery in Portland, how the building lease was not renewed and the owner sold to a developer. That was why she came back to Savannah, she said. I asked if she missed Portland. She set her fork down and looked out at the river for a long moment. "I miss the bakery," she said quietly. "I don't miss the city." Over the next few weeks, Elise started showing up at my house. The excuse was always the same: she was testing new recipes and needed someone to taste them. First Thursday, lemon shortbread wrapped in wax paper. Second Thursday, a brown butter banana loaf still warm from the oven. By the third week, I noticed the pattern. Every Thursday around 5 in the afternoon, without fail, she sat on the back steps of my porch while I worked in the garage, sanding something, adjusting something, always finding something to keep my hands busy, and when I came out wiping my palms on a shop rag, I poured 2 cups of coffee and sat beside her on the steps. We were not officially dating. We were not officially anything. There was no conversation about what this was, but there was a rhythm. Reliable as a tide, Elise arrived. I made coffee. We sat together and watched the yard go dark. Neither of us needed to explain it. It just was. I found the $100 bill in a shirt pocket after running the laundry one evening. The ink was slightly faded, the paper softened by hot water and tumbling. I smoothed it out on the kitchen counter and stuck it on the refrigerator under a fish-shaped magnet I picked up at a bait shop years ago. Every time I opened the fridge after that, I saw it Benjamin Franklin staring back at me from between the magnet and the white enamel. And every time I saw it, I thought about the barbecue. I thought about crossing the yard. I thought about Elise saying okay. One Thursday, Elise showed up later than usual. Her eyes were red, the kind of red that comes from crying and then trying very hard to look like you had not been crying. I did not ask. I did not push. I put the kettle on, made chamomile tea, and set it in front of her on the kitchen table without a word. She wrapped both hands around the mug and drank half before she spoke. "My mom asked me why I moved back to Savannah," she said, staring into the tea. I didn't know what to say. I looked at her across the table. The kitchen light was warm and yellow. "You don't need a reason to come home," I said. She looked up and held my gaze for a long time, the kind of look I did not understand then, but I understand perfectly now. Because the truth, the real truth I would not learn for months, was that Elise did not come back because her bakery closed. The closing was real, but she could have opened a new one anywhere: Portland, Seattle, Austin. She chose Savannah because I was here. She found out through Trey that I was divorced, She waited 6 months, 6 careful, deliberate months, and then she came home. Not for the city, not for her family. For me, I did not know it yet. I was still the last one to understand my own story. One afternoon, I was fixing a shelf bracket in the kitchen. Elise stood beside me, holding the board steady while I positioned the screws. Her fingers brushed mine when she passed me a nail, a contact so brief it barely qualified as touch, but it sent something through me like a current. Neither of us said a word. I could smell vanilla in her hair, not perfume vanilla but bakery vanilla, the kind that sinks into your skin when you work with butter and extract every day. In that moment, for the first time in 2 years, I wanted someone to stay. I did not say it out loud. Something shifted in that kitchen, quiet and unmistakable, like a door opening in a room I thought I had locked forever. Trey started making comments. "My sister goes to your house more than she comes to mine," he said one evening at the gas station on Duran Avenue. His voice was joking, but something sat underneath it, not anger, just the dawning awareness that something was changing between his best friend and his sister. Meanwhile, Elise kept bringing things every Thursday. A sourdough loaf one week, a small potted fern for the porch railing the next, then a used paperback she thought I would like, then a set of floral dish towels. She was filling my house one object at a time, so slowly that neither of us noticed the accumulation until I looked around the kitchen one day and realized it did not look like mine anymore. It looked like a place where 2 people lived. "You know why I bake?" she asked one Thursday evening, hands still white with flour from the crust she had been rolling. "Because when I'm kneading dough, I don't have to talk to anyone." I nodded. I understood that more than she probably knew. It was a Sunday afternoon in late September, and I was washing my truck in the driveway with a garden hose and a bucket of soapy water. A white SUV pulled up to the curb, waxed clean, expensive, the kind of vehicle that had never seen a dirt road. The door opened and Danielle stepped out. Straight hair pulled back tight, designer sunglasses, heels clicking on my cracked concrete driveway heels. She had chosen knowing full well the surface was not designed for them. She had not been to this house in 2 years, not since the afternoon she loaded her last boxes into a moving van and drove away without looking back. Now she said she needed to pick up a few things she had left behind. 2 years. And now she suddenly remembered. I let her in because I did not have the energy to argue about it on the front lawn. She walked through every room slowly, the way someone walks through a house they are inspecting, not looking for anything she left, but looking for evidence of something new. I followed from the hallway and said nothing. She noticed everything. The small fern on the porch railing, she knew I had never owned a plant in my life. The white pastry box on the kitchen counter with brown crumbs still on the lid. The floral dish towel hanging from the cabinet handled a towel I would never have bought, in a pattern I would never have chosen. A paperback novel on the coffee table, spine cracked. A bookmark halfway through a book about a woman who opens a bakery in the south of France. Danielle picked it up, looked at the cover, set it back down. Then she turned to me with one eyebrow raised. "You're seeing someone." It was not a question. I did not answer. I did not owe her an answer. I had not owed her anything in 2 years. That was the exact moment Elise pulled into the driveway. Thursday. Right on schedule, the way she always was. She stepped out of her car holding a brown paper bag, the kind that smelled like butter before you opened it. She saw Danielle standing on the front steps. She stopped. The 3 of us stood there, me in the doorway, Danielle on the steps, Elise by her car, and for a long moment, nobody spoke. The sprinkler 2 houses down hissed and clicked. Danielle looked Elise up and down, and slowly, the way someone sizes up a thing they have already decided to dismiss. Then she turned to me and smiled a small smile carrying more poison than any words. "Oh, I see." She went inside, took a cardboard box from the hall shelf, loaded it into the SUV, and drove away. 2 days later, Trey called. His voice was tight, careful. "Marcus, Danielle called my mom." My stomach dropped. Danielle had called Mrs. Landry and told her that Elise was chasing a recently divorced man, that something was wrong with a woman who leaves Portland with no plan. She implied Elise was latching onto me for the house, the paycheck, the stability. She twisted the facts just enough to sound reasonable to a mother who already worried about her quiet, sensitive daughter. Mrs. Landry, who loved Elise fiercely, but had always been confused by her silence and solitude, started asking hard questions. Why did you really come back? What are your plans? Are you sure this is what you need?" Elise did not defend herself. She sat at her mother's kitchen table and said nothing. That was how Elise dealt with pain. She did not argue. She did not fight back. She folded inward. The way dough folds when you press it flat on the counter, silent, patient, absorbing the pressure without a sound. Trey showed up at my house that same evening. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Elise and I had shared tea and coffee in silence for weeks. For the first time in all the years I had known him, Trey was not smiling. His jaw was tight. His hands were flat on the table. "Marcus, you know my sister. She's sensitive. She doesn't have armor the way you and I do. She doesn't know how to fight someone like Danielle, and she shouldn't have to. Danielle is hurting her, and you need to handle this." I asked what he meant by handle. He leaned forward, his eyes hard. "Talk to Danielle. Tell her to back off, or keep your distance from Elise until the whole thing blows over." I sat there and said nothing. The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Trey slapped his palm on the table hard enough to rattle the salt shaker. "You always do this, Marcus. You go quiet and you think quiet is enough. You think silence is the same thing as doing something. It's not. Not this time." I looked at the $100 bill on the refrigerator. The fish magnet. The faded ink. What started as a joke at a summer barbecue had become something none of us planned for, and it was pulling everyone apart. I sat in that kitchen for a long time after Trey left, staring at that bill, and I did not have a single answer. Thursday came. Elise did not show up. The back porch was empty at 5 o'clock. No paper bag on the steps, no knock on the screen door, no car pulling into the driveway. I sat outside with 2 cups of coffee, hers and mine, and watched the street until both went cold. The following Thursday, the same. The fern she had put on the railing was starting to brown at the tips, because I did not know how much to water it. I sent her a text, casual, careful, trying not to sound like a man who was losing something he had not yet named. "Any new recipes this Thursday?" 3 hours later, 2 words. "Busy this week." I knew she was lying. Elise did not cancel. She was the kind of person who said she was coming, and then came, rain or shine, without fail. Busy meant something else entirely. Busy meant she was pulling away, and I was letting her. I drove to the storefront she had leased on Broughton Street, the space she was slowly turning into a bakery. Through the glass, I could see her at the long steel counter, kneading dough alone. The fluorescent lights were off. The only light came from afternoon sun slanting through the window, catching flour dust that drifted through the air like slow-motion snow. The neon open sign flickered in the window, even though the place was months from opening. I stood outside the glass and watched. Her hands moved in that steady rhythm: push, fold, turn. After a moment she looked up and saw me through the window. She held my gaze for exactly 1 beat. Then she looked back down at the dough and kept going. She did not wave me in. She did not tell me to leave. She just kept kneading, hands white with flour, and I stood there on the sidewalk and realized something. This was how Elise cried. No tears, no sobs, just flour and silence, and the steady motion of her hands working the dough. That night, Danielle texted, "You deserve better than the bakery girl." I read the words. I did not reply. I deleted the message, but I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a long time, and I could feel Elise slipping further away with every day I chose silence over action. I drove to Danielle's office on a Tuesday morning. She worked at a commercial real estate firm downtown, glass doors, marble lobby, the kind of place that smelled like ambition and new carpet. I did not call ahead. I walked in, told the receptionist I needed to speak with Danielle Cole, and waited in a leather chair that probably cost more than my truck payment. She came out in a gray blazer, and for half a second I saw surprise cross her face before she smoothed it into the polished expression she wore like armor. We sat in a conference room with the door closed. I did not raise my voice. I did not clench my fists. I sat across from her and said what I had driven across town to say. "Danielle, you left because I wasn't enough. You told me that with your words and with the suitcase you packed on a Saturday morning. But you're not back now because I've suddenly become enough. You're back because you saw that someone else thinks I am and you can't stand it. That's not love. That's not even wanting me back. That's just not wanting anyone else to have what you threw away." She stared at me. Her mouth opened, then closed. I kept going. Don't call Mrs. Landry again. Don't text me. Don't show up at my house. What we had ended 2 years ago, and I don't owe you a single explanation for anything that has happened since." She said nothing. It was the first time in the entire history of our marriage that Danielle had nothing to say. I pushed in my chair, walked out through the lobby, past the receptionist, and into the parking lot. I sat in my truck for 5 minutes before starting the engine. My hands were steady. My heart was not. That evening, Trey came to my house. He sat on the couch, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and rubbed his face with both hands. When he looked up, his expression was something I had never seen on him, not anger, not protectiveness. Guilt. "Marcus, I have to tell you something. The bet at the barbecue. It wasn't my idea." I looked at him and said nothing. He took a long breath. "Elise called me 2 days before the party. She asked me her exact words. 'Is there any way you can get Marcus to talk to me?' I came up with the bet, the showmanship, the $100 in your face, the whole performance. That was me. But the money was hers. She gave me that bill before the party started and told me to make it look natural. She knew you would never walk across that yard on your own. She said a man who's been told he's not enough doesn't volunteer to be told it again. So she gave you a reason, a dare, a challenge, something that made it feel like courage instead of risk." I sat very still for a long time after Trey finished. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock above the stove. I stared at the $100 bill on the refrigerator door, pinned under the fish magnet. The faded ink, the softened paper. I had been looking at that bill for months, thinking it was a trophy from a bet I won. But I had not won anything. There was no bet. There was only a woman who had been in love with me long before I even noticed she was in the room. And this was the only way she knew how to reach me. That bill was not bet money. It never had been. It was Elise's first love letter written in numbers instead of words, delivered through her brother because she was too afraid to hand it to me herself. The next morning, I was sitting on the front step of Elise's bakery at 6 o'clock. The sky was gray. The street was empty. A thin layer of morning fog hung over the sidewalk, and my breath came out in small, visible clouds. I sat on the cold concrete with my hands in my jacket pockets and waited. At 6:30, Elise came walking up from the parking lot behind the building. Keys in one hand, canvas tote in the other. She saw me, stopped on the sidewalk, and stood very still. I held up the $100 bill. "Trey told me everything." She did not move. I stood up from the step. "You woke up at 5 in the morning to bake a pecan pie for a man you didn't even know liked you back. You moved to Savannah, not because your bakery closed. You could have opened one anywhere. You came to my house every Thursday not to test recipes. You brought a fern for my porch, dish towels for my kitchen, books for my shelf." Elise's hand tightened around her keys. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Are you angry?" I shook my head. "No, I'm grateful. Because somewhere in the last 2 years, I forgot how to walk towards someone, and you gave me a reason to remember." I placed the bill in her hand. "Keep it. You won the bet." She looked down at the money for a long moment. Then she folded it in half, then in half again, and slipped it into the front pocket of her apron, the one already dusted with yesterday's flour. She did not say "I love you." She did not cry. She did not throw her arms around me. She turned to the door, slid the key into the lock, and pushed it open. The smell of warm butter rolled out into the cold morning air like a wave. "Come in," she said without looking back. "I need someone to taste the new croissants." That was it. No kiss, no embrace, no grand declaration. Just an open door and the scent of melted butter filling a quiet street at dawn. Things did not change dramatically after that morning. Elise still came on Thursdays, but now she stayed for dinner. I cooked grilled chicken, pasta, whatever was in the pantry, and she brought whatever she had baked that day. We did not label what we were. We did not have a conversation about commitment or what to call each other. We just kept showing up week after week. The quiet between us was the same. It had always been comfortable, steady, but now there was something else inside it, an understanding we never had to speak out loud. I started helping her renovate the bakery space on Broughton Street. The walls needed paint. She chose a soft cream color that reminded me of pie crust. The display shelves were flimsy particle board, so I built new ones from reclaimed oak I salvaged from a decommissioned hull at the shipyard. I sanded them smooth, sealed them with a clear coat, and mounted them to the wall on a Saturday while she painted the trim around the windows. I replaced the overhead fluorescent tubes with warmer bulbs that made the whole space glow like candlelight. She stood on a stepladder to hang a chalkboard menu above the counter, and I held the ladder base and passed her the mounting hardware. We worked side by side in that small storefront for weeks, and most of the time, we did not talk. The sound of sandpaper and paint rollers and drills was its own kind of conversation. One late evening, after a long day of staining the shelves, Elise fell asleep on my couch. I found my grandmother's quilt green and cream patchwork, frayed at the edges, and draped it over her. Then I sat in the armchair across the room with a paperback and read until my eyes blurred. I must have fallen asleep too, because when I opened my eyes, morning light was streaming through the window, and Elise was sitting up on the couch with the quilt wrapped around her shoulders, looking at me slumped in the chair with the book on my chest and a pillow crease across my cheek. She laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a courtesy laugh, a real one, sudden and bright. The kind that crinkles the corners of your eyes and fills the room like sunlight. It was the first time I had heard her laugh like that. Something in my chest unlocked a door I did not know had been bolted shut. 6 months after that morning on the bakery steps, Landry's opened. She chose the family name, simple, clean, gold script painted on the glass front door. The space was small, 6 wooden tables inside, a curved glass display case by the register, a kitchen in the back that always smelled like butter and yeast and cinnamon. Saturday mornings there was a line out the door and down the sidewalk. She made croissants that people drove across town for. Every time I saw a customer lean against those oak shelves I had built to study the pastries behind the glass, I felt a quiet, private pride that I never tried to put into words. Trey came to the grand opening. He clapped me on the shoulder hard enough to make me spill my coffee. "My sister's happy, man. You owe me." I shook my head. "You owe her $100. He threw his head back and laughed the old Trey laugh, the full one, the one that had been missing during those difficult weeks. Danielle did not reach out again. I heard through a mutual friend at the shipyard that she had moved to Atlanta. I did not feel sad about it. I did not feel vindicated. I felt a kind of nothing that was not emptiness but release. That chapter was closed. The book it belonged to was on a shelf I would never reach for again. Thursday evenings became sacred. Elise would come after closing the bakery, and we sat in the backyard by the steel drum grill, the same grill from the barbecue where everything started. She propped her feet on a chair and read. I sat beside her and did nothing, just sat. The crickets started as the sky went from blue to purple, the string lights glowed to life, and we stayed until one of us felt the chill. I understood now what Danielle never wanted: quietness with someone in it. She wanted noise and spectacle. Elise wanted a porch, a book, and a man who would sit beside her without needing her to perform. I had been that man my whole life. I just never knew it was something anyone might want. A year after the bakery opened, the $100 bill was framed. Elise hung it on the wall behind the register in a simple black frame, no label, no plaque, no explanation. Customers noticed it every day. They always asked, "Why do you have a framed $100 bill on your wall?" And Elise would smile that quiet, private smile and say, "That's the best investment I ever made." Nobody understood. Only 3 people in the world knew the story behind that frame: me, Elise, and Trey. Every morning, Elise woke at 4 to start the dough. Every morning I woke at 5, brewed coffee in the dark, poured 1 cup black, no sugar, drove to the bakery, and set it on the counter before she came out of the kitchen. Every single morning, she never saw me do it. But the cup was always there when she emerged. She never asked who brought it. She knew. That was how I told her, not with words, but with a cup of coffee on a counter in a dark bakery before the sun came up. One evening, sitting on the couch with her feet tucked under her, Elise turned to me. "Do you ever regret taking that bet?" I thought about it, really thought. The way you do when the answer matters. "No," I said, "but I regret not walking across that yard sooner, without anyone having to bet me to do it." She leaned her head against my shoulder. Neither of us said anything after that. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet I used to think meant loneliness. Now I knew it meant something else entirely. Mrs. Landry started calling me for Sunday dinner. She never made a formal announcement about it, never apologized for the hard questions she had asked Elise months before. She just called one Sunday and said, "Marcus, "Can you come look at the kitchen faucet? It's been dripping." That was her way acceptance delivered through a leaking faucet and a seat at the dinner table. I showed up with my toolbox, fixed it in 20 minutes, and stayed for pot roast, collard greens, and cornbread. Under the table, Trey elbowed me in the ribs and whispered, "You're family now, brother. Whether you want to be or not." I look back at all of it now: the barbecue, the bet, the pecan pie, the Thursdays on the porch, the flour on her hands, and the $100 bill on the refrigerator, and I know how close I came to missing everything. Not because I did not want Elise. I did. I wanted her from the moment she said okay, but I had forgotten how to believe that someone might choose me. Danielle taught me I was not enough. 2 years of empty rooms confirmed it. Elise taught me that enough is not something another person decides. The bravest thing she ever did was not a confession or a grand gesture. It was waking at 5 in the morning to bake a pie for a man who might not even notice, and doing it anyway. That $100 bill hangs in a frame in a small bakery on Broughton Street. The paper is soft, the ink is faded, but its true value was never about money. It was the courage of a woman who would rather take the long way around than let me stand still forever. If someone in your life is going the long way just to get close to you, stop making them walk. Step toward them. Just one step. That is all it takes. Have you ever let someone slip away because you thought you were not worth choosing? And if you were Elise, would you have the courage to stage a bet just to get someone to walk across a yard? If this story reached you, hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. I read every single one. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. I took that bet because of $100, but what I won no amount of money could ever buy.